Brum's off to the big town. Brum!
I've always considered myself proud to look back at a lot of nostalgic kids TV shows from the UK. And while a lot of people can have their fair share of shows like Wallace and Gromit, Bob the Builder, and of course Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, the one show that always sticks out to me was Brum. There's just something about this show that gives me memories whenever I see that little car going on its adventures in the big town. While I do like watching the 90s era, I will always remember the early 2000s one, because it was what I grew up with. These days, while I still enjoy the show very much, if there was one thing that pisses me off, it's the fact that the company didn't reboot it once with a CGI version of the show that was just dull and boring. They rebooted it twice and just made it 10 times worse, simply just by making Brum a 2D cartoon and making him look like Putt-Putt's rejected cousin. However, I'm not here to write to you all about how much I hate the two reboots of my favourite show. I'm going to be writing down things about a lost episode of Brum I found in my attic. And as cliche as it sounds, this episode was on a VHS tape with no labels and just a blank case. I knew I should have just ignored it, but being a guy who collects video cassettes to sit back and watch them for old time's sakes, from old classic Disney movies to of course nostalgic kids TV shows, I decided to give it a look myself. Although after watching this episode, I could see why this was hidden from me. From what I like to guess, this episode was made by a college kid who wanted people to be aware of the countless murders that had been going on around the world. But the video was just so dark, the kid was kicked out. And from what I'm about to tell you guys, I'm sure you'll find out why. And while I'm writing this, I didn't know what to do with the tape, so I decided to keep it somewhere safe, where no one would have to witness what I have to see. But anyway, onto what it contained. The tape starts off fairly normal, with the 2000s Brum intro playing, but just slightly slower in pitch. So far, you'd think it would just be a simple episode, right? Well, that's when it actually started. The episode begins with Brum driving down the pavement, passing by people as they wave hello to him. As this was going on, the title of the episode appears above, which was called Brum and the Madman Escape. After the title faded, Brum stops by the large factory and decides to go inside. That's when something felt odd. Right after the intro, the narrator was gone. There was no sign of Tom Wright or Sarah Witchwell at all. Anyway, that's when we see the story's villain, which we're gonna call him the Madman, simply from the title. He peeked out of the entrance and watched Brum enter as he smirked, while holding a crowbar. Now, if you ask me, the show is always known to have so many silly baddies in the show, but unlike them, the madman seems to be the most menacing one, because he actually looked like someone who wanted to kill Brum, judging from his crowbar. Back to the episode. Brum slowly looks around the factory, which, despite the sounds of the machines going and all the broken up cars around the area, no one seems to be at work. The factory was completely empty and Brum was alone. That's when he turns and sees the madman. He looks down at Brum with a devilish grin on his face, and while still holding his crowbar, he points at him and draws his thumb across his neck, gesturing to Brum that he is going to die. Now, normally in the show, when the villains are stealing something or when things are getting away, Brum chases them down and saves the day. But in this episode, no. This time, in a very rare case, Brum starts to drive away from the madman as the normal music plays. Further onto the episode, that's when things start to get disturbing. Brum had slowed down while hiding from the madman, but that's when he noticed dry blood under a door. Brum looked in and then saw 3 workers laying across the floor who had been long dead. He then noticed that the workers died almost the same way, which was a crowbar to the face. Not wanting to see any more of the scene, Brum quickly drives out of the room and continues to look for a way out. As he kept doing so, he watched a crane, which he assumed was on autopilot, drop a broken up car into a shredder, which crushes it into pieces. Brum knew he needed to get out of the factory, but as soon as he found an exit, he sees the madman jumping from a corner, blocking his path, and slowly approach him. As he shakes his finger at Brum, telling him something like, "Did you really think I'd let you out of here?" He looks up at the man, his bonnet open and headlights crossed, showing that he's angry while backing away from him. And then turning away, he speeds off again, with the madman chasing after him. Brum later sees a bucket full of water and knocks it over, making the madman slip and fall straight into a broken car that was ready to be picked up by the crane. When the man realizes where he is, he begins to freak out and climb out of the car, but forgotten how high he was from the ground, so he fell into the conveyor belt, breaking his legs in the process. Brum drives over and sees the madman begging to be saved. Now, I know the acting on the show can be a bit cheesy, but while the acting here is still so, in this current situation, it felt like you were watching a silent horror movie. In fact, the whole episode makes you feel like so. Anyway, Brum continues to stare at the madman, pleading to save his life. However, with what Brum had to see what the man did to the workers, he just backed away a bit and did nothing. The man's begging turned into screams as he continued, till it was too late, and he ends up in the shredder. His blood-curdling screams can be heard as blood then splattered out of the shredder and landed on the floor in front of Brum, a bit of it getting on his grill and bonnet. The screaming from the madman kept on going, along with his bones cracking and his flesh being cut up, till the entire factory was filled with silence. The screen then fades to Brum finally exiting the factory, but then noticed a sign on the entrance which displayed that the factory has gone out of business and is closing down for good. Brum was glad that he had survived, but felt sorry that no one else came out of the factory alive. Looking down at the ground with that thought, he starts to drive as far away from the factory as possible, while the camera pans over from the factory entrance to Brum driving down the pavement into the distance. Before the tape finally came to an end, it cuts to the credits with Brum gets things done, but the entire screen had a red tint to it. The audio was demonic, had a bit of reverb to it, and was playing in reverse. As the music was about to end, it slowly fades out till there was no more sound, apart from the buzzing on the tape. Then it cuts to the Ragdoll logo, but the screen was black while the drawing was white, and instead of a smile being drawn onto the logo, it was a frown. And the copyright notice displayed Ragdoll Limited MMV in Times New Roman, and again, there was no sound, and the screen fades to black.